Hey random stranger, I hope you've been going good. So today we're going to recap episodes 9 and 10 of Fate Season 2 and then watch episode 11 and then leave the finale for next time so that we can have a longer discussion about the entire series as a whole. Episode 9 opened with this lovely scene of Ojiisan and Waver just sharing a quiet moment under the stars and sipping on some hot coffee. So it turned out that he has actually known for some time that Waver isn't actually his real grandson. The reason being that he's actually too nice, of all things. But his grandfather was perfectly content with this lie because it made his wife happy. And in his view, Waver is the better grandson anyway, which just goes to show that sometimes buying into a comforting lie can actually make you happier than the truth. And I've certainly experienced that myself in the past. And while I don't think it's always the best choice, it does tend to work out that way in a lot of different situations. The thing I found most interesting to compare here was the difference between Ojiisan's and Ryder's philosophies on life, I guess. So in the last few episodes, Ryder had told Waver that he had better be sure that what he's risking his life for is worth it. Whereas grandfather is like, there's really nothing worth risking your life for. And that outlook, I think, prioritizes enjoying the present moment, you know, instead of chasing abstract ideals or these very abstract and grand dreams. By contrast, Ryder is all about sacrificing everything in the pursuit of those impossible dreams. It's a philosophy that is constantly striving for the distant, unattainable horizon, and the chase itself is what gives life meaning. So which approach do I personally lean more towards? Because I do think it does come down to personal opinion and preferences. While I do find Ojiisan's philosophy enticing, his statement that nothing is worth risking your life for is really, it's more than just caution. It's this fundamental belief that life itself and all of its simple pleasures is the most precious thing that we have. And to risk those for any dream or goal, no matter how noble, is misguided. You know, you should always appreciate what you have now, basically. On the other hand, I do take Ryder's perspective as well. Like, I've taken risks, for example, in my own life where the outcome was very uncertain, and I didn't regret it. Obviously, not to the point where I risked my own life, clearly, but even where my life choices didn't end so well, I think I would have regretted it more had I not gone for it. So I do think I'm going to just cop out and say I think both Ojiisan and Ryder have good points. So Kiritsugu is strategizing his next move against Kirei, but he was also doing a bit of wallowing in his own loneliness, which is also fair. You know, his two closest allies had been stripped away from him. There's Maya, who had always accepted his methods without question, and then Irisfield, who shared his vision and was actually a source of warmth for Kiritsugu, I think, in his mostly very cold existence. For the first time in a very long time, Kiritsugu was left alone, and I think that forced him to confront the human cost of his actions and the path that he's chosen. How there always seems to be collateral damage involving the people that he is closest to. And maybe he was even thinking about Natalia. So it was this rare moment of vulnerability for someone who is just way too practiced at suppressing his emotions. Adding to his isolation is the fact that even at this late stage in the game, Kiritsugu still can't bring himself to trust Saber. She represents everything that he has rejected in his pursuit of the greater good. Things like honor and idealism that he's kind of just chucked to the side, making it impossible for him to see her as a true ally. The murder of Irisfield, even though, yes, she is turning back into the vessel for the Grail, but I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that Kirei straight up just killed her. That was very painful to watch. Kirei was all smug about how he was going to win the Grail, and even more smug about how he really gets Kiritsugu. But Irisville burst his bubble by telling him straight up that he and Kiritsugu couldn't be more different. And what was fascinating is that seemed to really piss Kirei off. I think this whole time he's been banking on this hope that he's not the only one in the world who is essentially an empty shell of a human being. He'd convinced himself that Kiritsugu was almost this kindred spirit of his, just another nihilistic guy who sees the world as meaningless. The existence of someone else just like him probably gave Kirei a sense of validation and comfort in his own emptiness. And I find it ironic that his one hope was that there's someone else who, like him, doesn't hope to begin with. So Irisville essentially sealed her own death by revealing that Kiritsugu has been fighting for world peace this whole time. And for Kirei to learn that Kiritsugu is in fact the ultimate idealist, intoxicated by this idea that conflict can somehow be eliminated once and for all from humanity, that revelation seemed to almost disgust him. I'm actually with Kirei on this point, weird as that is to say. I agree that as long as humans exist, conflict will exist. I think that's just the way things are. And that to get rid of conflict would require also getting rid of human free will. That's not to say that I don't find Kiritsugu's dream admirable, but I do think that it completely misreads the capacity of humans to live conflict-free. Ironically, even though Kiritsugu harbors this very childlike dream, he goes about it in the most calculated ways possible. He's had to make some really tough decisions and sacrificed the people that he loves, even if it's killed him on the inside. I think Kirei became so angry at discovering that Kiritsugu is actually driven by this impossibly, disgustingly idealistic goal to the point of killing Irisville, because it shattered his own self-justification for the hollowness that he feels inside of himself. He'd used his, I guess, perceived similarity to Kiritsugu as a way to justify his own lack of purpose and emotion. In this moment, however, Kirei suddenly had to confront how alone he is in nihilism. He'd lost that kindred spirit, so to speak. I also think that learning Kiritsugu is wanting, world peace might have triggered maybe an intense envy in Kirei. If even someone as broken as Kiritsugu can find meaning and purpose in life, something that has eluded Kirei despite his desperate search for it, what does that then say about him as a person? So in his disillusionment, Kirei latched onto this new purpose, and that is to crush Kiritsugu's idealism, his dream. It was like his twisted way of resolving to prove his own worldview correct, and probably also finding some perverse enjoyment while he's at that. And it started with killing someone he knows Kiritsugu deeply cares about. Just the immediacy and the violence of Kirei's reaction showed how deeply that discovering Kiritsugu's idealism had shaken him. It was this very impulsive act of destruction. He wanted to prove to himself that he could still feel something, even though it's only through causing pain to others. And I think it was this critical turning point for Kirei's character. He went from kind of still searching for a meaning or searching for whether he actually has desires inside of himself to now finding purpose in the destruction of others' hopes and dreams. So someone, i.e. Kirei, sent up these flares as a challenge to the remaining contestants to a final battle. But before getting to all that, there was this scene that showed Waver still struggling with, I guess, his inferiority complex. His initial bravado that had led him to just barge into this war has completely worn off, replaced by this sudden realization of his very own limitations. It was kind of like he stopped He looked around at what he'd gotten himself into and was like, well, shit. And because he felt so out of depth, Waver tried to free Ryder from the master-servant bond by using up all of his command seals and giving Ryder that extra boost by commanding him to win the war, which, because of the vagueness of the commands, I don't think did much anyway. That act showed a couple of things. It was Waver acknowledging his own perceived inadequacy as a master. It shows that Waver genuinely cares for Ryder's well-being and his chances of victory and achieving his dream. And it also showed how Waver has kind of graduated from this self-centered ambition to now being more selfless and supporting someone else. However, this attempt to sever their official bond only revealed a much deeper connection that has formed between Ryder and Waver, which is genuine friendship, built on mutual respect. And you know what? This relationship progression felt earned. Like, it didn't feel corny at all. Initially, their pairing was pretty awkward. It was this powerful legend king paired with this very insecure underdog student who had no business being in this war. But every step of their journey contributed to them seeing each other as equals now. That camaraderie, it grew out of fighting battles together, and that partnership, I guess, that equal partnership that they both gained turned out to be more valuable than anything else, including victory. Their relationship is kind of like this very stark contrast to the mostly very ruthless and transactional nature of the Holy Grail War and of the other master-servant partnerships that we've seen. In a sense, both Ryder and Waver achieved a form of winning that transcends the official outcome of the war. Ryder helped Waver find courage and his self-respect, while Waver gave Ryder his loyalty and I guess this renewed perspective on leadership. So even though they didn't win the Grail, I think they both got what they wanted in the end. While Kirei was waiting for Kiritsugu to appear, he made it very clear that he still doesn't really care about actually getting the Grail, to the point of not caring whether it's destroyed or not in the crossfire. All he really cares about is crushing Kiritsugu's dreams. However, Archer seemed pretty confident that the Grail would ultimately reveal Kirei's true desires, even though he doesn't believe that he has any, which I think suggests some interesting things about Kirei and the nature of the Grail itself. One, it suggests that the Grail has powers beyond just granting wishes. It does seem to be able to sort of peer into the deepest parts of a person's soul, uncovering these desires that they don't even know are there. Two, Archer's been around the block for a while. As this ancient being, he's been around humans enough to know or maybe recognize that even Kirei has a fundamental human trait, and that is the need for purpose or for some kind of meaning, no matter how deeply buried or deeply twisted. Also, Kirei's claim of not caring about the Grail could also be a form of self-deception. Maybe he's actually scared of finding out what he truly desires. And let's also not forget that at the end of the day, Archer just kind of wants to have fun. He's probably hoping that the Grail might uncover or even amplify the darkest parts of Kirei's psyche, and Archer really just wants to be around for whatever chaos will ensue when that happens. Okay, so Irisfield's visions from, I guess, inside the Grail also gave this haunting picture of the nature of the Grail itself and the darker implications of the Holy Grail War. So that horrible vision of this mountain of homunculi with very dead, creepy stares brought home just how many past vessels have been made and then sacrificed for each new Grail War, I'm assuming. And that scares the shit out of Irisfield for good reason, because next in line to be the Grail's vessel will be Ilya. The memory, I think this actually happened. The memory of Ilya being scared of turning into a cup with these 7 lumps inside of her, symbolizing the 7 servants, showed that from the perspective of the vessel. The Grail is something that is terrible, that eventually consumes them. It's a completely different perspective to the servants and the masters that are fighting for this Grail, who see it as this powerful holy relic to be won and possessed and wished on. Iris Veal, her existential question of, like, who am I, as she kind of melted into the Grail and got pulled down into the gunk by the other homunculi, really focused on this loss of her identity. For her whole existence, she has struggled probably with the tension between her predetermined role as just another vessel in a very long line of vessels for the Grail versus this very vibrant individual personality that she developed, including the life that she lived and experienced with Kiritsugu. The tragic irony is that Iris Veal's loss of self was the result of her fulfilling her designed purpose. And I think that's another thing that distinguishes her from a human. You know, for humans, it's almost the opposite. Conventional wisdom says that when you find and fulfill your life's purpose, that is when you're most in touch with your sense of self and identity. And that kind of just makes me even sadder for the fate that Iris Veal was dealt. The moment that Iris Veal described the Grail as something that will end the world's suffering, but then said that I will have the power to make that happen, it was like her assimilation into the Grail had been completed. Like either the Grail was speaking through her or she was the Grail itself. But then we kind of just did this dive down into Iris Veal and ended up with this shot of like evil looking Iris Veal paired with the creepy music that was playing in the background. It seemed to hint at something twisted about the Grail itself. So it may not be the benevolent wish-giving device that it's believed to be or believes itself to be, and it has, it seems, its own corrupted agenda. Or maybe like it's just the huge numbers of sacrifices and deaths and unfulfilled wishes and rage, etc., over the multiple Grail wars. All of that has somehow warped its original pure purpose. I don't know. There's definitely something sinister about the Grail and its purported ambition to erase all human suffering, which is why even if Kiritsugu were to win the Grail and make that exact wish, I really don't think it's going to end the way that he wants it to. We get to the showdown between Ryder and Archer. Waver's excitement riding into this battle shows how much Ryder has actually influenced him. He's moved from fear to really embracing this thrill of challenge. Him thinking that he can somehow keep Ryder from dying, especially since he used up those command seals for that exact reason, shows how much he has bought into Ryder's anything is possible attitude. I think this scene, it really brought home why it's hard not to like Ryder. He embodies this idea that true greatness comes from embracing your full humanity, including all of your flaws and imperfections. And that stands in stark contrast to this idea of being a perfect, untouchable leader, i.e. like Saber's philosophy. So by living authentically and not being afraid to show all aspects of his personality, Ryder inspires his followers to do the same. And I get it. Like I get why he's portrayed as this great king and also why he's like a bit of a fan favorite. Ryder made one last attempt to co-opt Gilgamesh into a partnership. And he had to have known that it was impossible, like it wouldn't work, but it's in his nature to try anyway. It was cool to note Gilgamesh's reference to Enkidu. I think that revealed this rare emotional side to him that even he was once capable of having or forming deep connections with someone else. But his ego ultimately won't allow for another king to rule alongside him. Gil is so different to Ryder in a lot of different ways. Ryder embraces collaboration and he sees his army not just as his subordinates, but companions on this shared journey of conquest. He doesn't demand perfection from them, only that they are loyal and they share his passion for this end goal. And he also has this endearing way of acknowledging his own like faults and limitations, even though he is this legendary king. Whereas Gilgamesh, he embodies the untouchable, solitary ideal of kingship. And that's largely because he sees himself as fundamentally superior to everyone else and everything else. He is also very intolerant of imperfection. He views all relationships, except the one that he had with Enkidu, in terms of ownership and subjugation. So Raida conjured his Ionian Heteroi and led his entire army to charge, which looked very impressive. And to cut a dramatic scene very short, Archer acknowledged Raida's ability to gather people around him to fight for this shared dream, but that didn't stop him from destroying and giving them a huge dose of reality. Basically, Raida's entire army gets swallowed up by Archer's Enuma Elish, which is this anti-world noble phantasm that destroys creation. Being the natural asshole that he is, there is no doubt that Gilgamesh enjoyed doing that, but I do think it also goes a lot deeper than that. By crushing Raida's dream and his army, he was also asserting his dominance and reinforcing his belief in his own supremacy. So it was a matter of self-preservation almost. Gilgamesh, who values individual greatness above all, would see Raida's idea of sharing ambitions with his subjects as weak, almost like it's this dilution of true kingship or true nobility. On the other hand, seeing the genuine loyalty of Raida's army and their willingness to just ride into battle with him like this might have reminded Gilgamesh of what he once had with Enkidu, and that may have stirred up some painful emotions that he'd much rather suppress. So unable to direct his anger at the true source of his pain, i.e. the loss of Enkidu, Gilgamesh was channeling it towards Raida and his followers. I don't know, it's just a theory. Like, could it be that he is reenacting his own loss, but this time with him in control? So by crushing Raida's army, he's basically reminding himself to be like, see, this is why getting close to people is a bad idea. It leaves you wide open to getting hurt, and the people close to you get hurt. I found this moment really interesting. So when Waver looked back up at Raida, Raida's eyes were hidden, but the shadows over his face seemed to suggest a moment of contemplation or regret even. It's like, even though he's always going on about pursuing dreams no matter the cost, it's entirely plausible that at this moment he was experiencing a deep, if fleeting, sense of guilt. As a leader, Raida bears the ultimate responsibility for the fates of his men. And in that moment, when his entire army had been swallowed up and just absolutely destroyed, I think he would have felt the full weight of that burden. Failure, it can sow these seeds of doubt, and it might have momentarily made Raida question whether his sacrifice was truly worth it. He's had those questions in his mind before. Also, I think he's just naturally a genuinely empathetic kind of guy, and empathy is a double-edged sword. You know, it would have made him feel the loss of each and every one of his soldiers very acutely. But in the end, Raida was able to rally himself one last time. And I think Waver helped with that. Like, when he looked at Waver and his willingness to follow him and to chase his dreams, I think he would have seen the reflection of his own ideals and the impact that he'd had on Waver. That was enough to reignite his own passion, despite the crushing loss that he'd just endured by losing his entire army. I think what makes Alexander so great is his ability to connect with and inspire others. So in that moment before his final charge, he didn't just command Waver, you know, he invited him to share in the glory of their last stand. When Raida was charging towards Archer and just getting shot through with legendary weapons, I don't think it was just bravado that was making him charge forward. You know, his concept of glory beyond the horizon, it wasn't about reaching a physical destination, but attaining a particular state of being, this being that eternally pursues greatness. And he understood that the very act of striving, of pressing forward even in the face of impossible odds, was itself the realization of his dream. And that's why I think in killing Raida, Archer still accords him this respect, to the point where he offered to let Raida challenge him repeatedly and experience the thrill of battle for all eternity. effectively granting Ryder his wish. So it really was a perfect, if bittersweet, end for Ryder. At this point, I think it's interesting to kind of interrogate Fate Zero's comparative treatment of Ryder and Saber, which I have been thinking about for a while, and it's been interesting reading different people's perspective on it. So I have made no secret of it. I do think that Fate Zero's treatment of the two legends seems a bit lopsided. And now that we've seen Ryder's end, I still think that. I think the story glossed over the problems that Alexander had with his army, like how they got fed up with his constant push for conquest, even to the point of rebellion. Nor does it ever mention the infighting that happened after Ryder died, when his empire completely fell apart because it was no longer held together by the sheer force of his personality. On the flip side, the show does focus intensely on the perceived flaws of Saber or Arturia or King Arthur, and her leadership style, like her emotional distance, her over rigid adherence to ideals, and all of the unintended consequences that flowed from that, to the point where literally a major plot point is the reveal that one of her own knights, Lancelot, became Berserker. While both rulers in their respective legends are shown to have their own strengths and weaknesses, I think Fate Zero tends to highlight Alexander's positives while amplifying Arturia's negatives, which has created this narrative bias that subtly pushes viewers to favor Alexander's style of leadership. Sure, there are a couple of moments where Ryder really seemed to reflect on the darker aspects of his rule, but they were very brief, and he never really struggles with much inner conflict, and really, to the end, sticks to his ideas about kingship. Saber, on the other hand, is not only super hard on herself, but she also cops a lot of flack from the other characters, like Archer, for instance, who will never give Saber the same respect that he gives Ryder. So even within the story's internal logic, Alexander's approach seems more worthy of admiration somehow. I do get that it's quite subjective, and that they wanted to contrast different leadership styles, which I think they did very effectively, but I think it just would have felt less lopsided or fairer or even more interesting narratively if they'd showed more of the issues with Alexander's conquest-driven rule, while also highlighting some of the positive outcomes of Arturia's more idealistic form of governance. So, there is 2 more episodes to go, so maybe Saber will get a chance to shine, but we shall see. The image of Alexander hearing the waves of Oceanus at the end was deeply significant. So in ancient Greek mythology, Oceanus was believed to be this massive river that encircled the entire world. And for Alexander the Great, reaching the end of the world was something that he never fully realized in his historical conquests. And it suggested that Ryder, in death, was finally able to reach that horizon, that frontier that he sought his whole life. And being able to experience Oceanus in his heroic spirit form fits with his belief that pursuing dreams matters more than actually achieving them, that the pursuit can go on even after your physical death. So I do think it was a really great, just a fitting end to his character. Waver's very evident pain at the loss of his friend, and his love and his loyalty for Ryder, I think might have reminded Archer of his own lost friendship with Enkidu, the one true friend that he had lost so long ago. And so I kind of agree with Wired Learner that Waver too also received a perfect end. So they wrote, remember the reason he joined the Holy Grail War in the first place. He wanted to be respected. Just before the fight, he gained Ryder's respect, and after the fight, he even gained Archer's respect. Archer, who is extremely arrogant and is shown to have respect for basically no one except Kirei. Waver may not have won the Grail, but he did get his wish. I absolutely agree. I think the reason why Waver was able to attain Gilgamesh's respect is, as the king of heroes, who possesses all of the world's treasures, Archer would have recognized just how rare and valuable genuine loyalty and friendship are. They're not treasures that you can own, but they're freely given. That's the only way you can get them. And as an immortal being who's been around forever, Archer has seen tons of human drama and treachery play out. So even though he usually acts bored and incredibly cynical, which makes sense given how long he's been around for, it might be why deep down Archer is particularly appreciative of when someone expresses authentic, unguarded loyalty. It would be almost like a breath of fresh air for him. Back to Kariya, who is, surprise, surprise, still in a very rough state. As he hallucinated Sakura, it became clear that he's really lost sight of his original goal. The good intentions, or any good intentions that once drove him, have been completely eroded by the brutality of the war and of his own actions. Kariya is now so desperate that Kirei can easily manipulate him, and he's just clinging to his empty promises of winning the Grail. But killing Aoi, the very person he was trying to protect, was the ultimate perversion of what Kariya initially set out to do. There's really no coming back from that, and so he's left to descend into madness. And I honestly don't know if death at this point would be more merciful than continuing to exist in this sort of fugue state. I really appreciated this comment from Dave Asher because it gave a different perspective on Kariya's character. So last time I had pointed out some of the darker aspects of Kariya's intentions, and I think this comment was great in terms of being able to balance things out a bit. So they wrote, "To play devil's advocate for a bit, I think you're being a little too harsh on Kariya. Being in church during such a well-orchestrated state of distress, confusion, hopelessness, denial, and anger, with the worms eating at Kariya's brain, I think all logic and rationality was out of the window at that point." Yeah, absolutely agree. With emotions fully taking the wheel on both sides, and just as he was the only target in the firing range to Aoi's despair finally boiling over, she was just as much in his, amplified multiple times over by the broken state of his mind. It wasn't as much a nice guy badly taking a rejection, and more just anger at the person in front of him denying his core values, his selflessness, his sacrifice right in his face. I always saw his wailing on his way out of the church, not him lamenting the pointlessness of his quest and his broken heart, but him immediately regretting what he just did by giving in to the moment of madness, just as he still is in the latest episode with his hallucinations of Sakura and Aoi. If he really was doing it just for the sake of his unrequited love for Aoi and her approval, I'm sure he would have ended himself after doing what he did, but he still keeps pushing himself and suffering for Sakura's sake. He knew from the start that he would be dead by the end of this. His love would never be reciprocated, and most that he could hope for is some gratitude before he died, and that Aoi and the girls would live happy lives afterwards. And then they went on to point out some terrible things about Tokiomi that kind of gives context for Kariya's desire to free Aoi and the girls from that situation. Thank you for breaking that down. Kariya's circumstances and his choices to date is like watching a classic Greek tragedy just play out on stage. You know, it's a train wreck in slow motion. He is this prime example of that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think you made great points about how his actions were at least partly selfless, you know, especially because he is still doing this for Sakura. And you're right, he went into this knowing that he wouldn't make it to the other end. Although at the same time, I still can't quite shake the feeling that mixed in there was a bit of selfish wish fulfillment as well. But I think that's what makes him so interesting and why we can keep coming back to his character. For me personally anyway, I don't think you can really pin Kariya down as either a full-on villain or a full-on hero. He's kind of somewhere in between, and it's very complicated. And actually that feeling applies for most characters in Fate. So I found the Saber-Berserker conflict and its link to Saber's flaws as a king the trickiest to understand. So it was confirmed that Berserker is indeed Lancelot. Saber basically forced him into revealing his identity by invoking the Knight's Code. Further confirming Lancelot's identity was the reveal of Arendite, which is actually Lancelot's sword. On the surface, according to legend, or depending on which version of the legend you read, Lancelot was torn up because he couldn't be both loyal to Arturia and also honor his love for Guinevere. It was either one or the other. But the show implied a deeper reason as well for Lancelot's descent into madness. It suggested that Saber's approach to kingship, you know, being distant and emotionally detached, played a role in pushing Lancelot to become Berserker. Initially, I thought that Saber's emotionless response to Lancelot's betrayal was due to her just trying to treat it as a matter of law rather than a personal grievance. Her idea of a king being above everyone and everything led her to deny Lancelot the emotional acknowledgement that he craved after the betrayal, and that hurt him more than if she just expressed pure anger at his actions. He would have much preferred if Saber cared enough to hate him instead of being so coldly logical about it. It's very true when people say that indifference is much worse than hate. At least that was my interpretation, but I didn't feel like that was complete, which is why I'm so grateful that there were a couple of great comments where a few of you filled in the gaps for me. So here's some additional context from Ha Emia. Arthur Arturia was away campaigning in Rome when all the Lancelot-Guinevere stuff happened. Agravain was in charge of Camelot, and Mordred was already very busy stirring up rebellions. Agravain ordered Guinevere executed for her affair with Lancelot to restore order in the realm, and Lancelot flew into a fit of rage, killing many of his fellow knights to get to and save Guinevere from her execution. This included young Gareth, sibling to Agravain, Mordred, and Gawain, who was Lancelot's own squire. Okay, so that is one layer of the immense guilt that Lancelot would have felt. But then here's the other bit. So when Arthur returned, he forgave Lancelot and Guinevere because he felt sympathy for Guinevere for being trapped in a loveless marriage, a pawn of higher forces just like Arthur himself was. That pardoning was the last drop in the bucket that finally triggered the Civil War, which destroyed Arthur's Britain, with several knights siding with Mordred because Arthur forgave Lancelot so easily. And it was what drove Lancelot mad with guilt for never receiving punishment, hence qualifying for the Berserker class. Thank you so much. That made things make much more sense. So yes, Lancelot's violent rescue of Guinevere and the killing of Gareth added to his guilt and explains partly why he went crazy, but Arturia forgiving him made it much, much worse. And it would have made it worse because Lancelot, I'm just paraphrasing it so I get it into my head, Lancelot, overwhelmed with guilt, would have expected and even wanted to be punished. Saber's forgiveness denied him that catharsis of facing the consequences for what he'd done. And he would have hated himself even more because he felt that he didn't deserve a free pass, basically. In chivalric culture, actions should have clear consequences, whereas Saber's forgiveness disrupted that whole accepted or expected social order, which left Lancelot feeling unmoored and really confused about where he stood. So Saber's very inhuman ability to forgive such a grave betrayal would have frustrated Lancelot. Without any clear consequences for his actions, that, emotional tension of the betrayal kept building up, potentially festering into this rage and madness over time. And as the comment also mentioned, if Saber's forgiveness eventually led to this political instability and just outright civil war and conflict amongst the knights, which eventually led to tearing the nation apart, that would definitely have added to Lancelot's guilt and just mental anguish. So at the end of it all, Arturia's forgiveness, while well-intentioned, actually became a sort of torture for Lancelot. The whole mess illustrates, I think, the show's central question of what effective leadership looks like. Should a ruler be super stoic and just completely rational about all of their decisions? Or should they be more human and show their human side and, not be that cold, distant, solitary figure? After all of that, all of your comments, just this scene with Arthur and Lancelot, I do get writers' criticism of Saber more now. Kirei's recital of Psalm 23, which is this famous psalm from the Bible, was a deeply twisted, deeply ironic moment, very creepy, as is usually the case with Kirei, and it was fascinating seeing how they paired each verse with the images on the screen. So Psalm 23 is a poem or a song of hope and comfort and trust in divine protection. For Kirei to recite those words was just a complete mockery of those very concepts, I think. Kirei, a faithless man who is openly contemptuous about or of the church's teachings, reciting one of the most beloved and comforting passages in the Bible was like as if a demon was quoting scripture. It highlights the hollowness and the hypocrisy of his position within the church. He is, after all, still the arbiter of the Holy Grail War, and he just smoothly stepped into his father's previous position. So it was a bit terrifying having those comforting words come out of his mouth in particular. When he got to the part, "My cup runneth over," and Irisville, the holy vessel, so to speak, is laid out on the table like that, it created, I don't know, this profound sense of sacrilege. It felt like this deliberate desecration of something that's meant to be sacred, and really understood Kirei's role as an antagonist and this agent of chaos. He can perfectly perform like the outward actions of faith and the holy aspects of the war while being internally antithetical to everything it represents, just like he's participating in the Grail War even as he cares nothing for the Grail itself. Fate Zero Season 2 Episode 11. Here we go. The showdown I think we've all been waiting for. Where are they? Ooh, Kirei. I hate when he smiles. Ah, those black keys. I feel like this whole episode is going to be just them fighting it out. And I don't know if they'll do that shonen thing where they have these super long conversations about life philosophies and whatnot. It's really interesting because I don't think we've ever seen Kiritsugu in close combat before or hand to hand. It's so odd that he brought a pistol to a blade fight or whatever those are that Kirei uses, the black keys. They most certainly look like blades. Yeah, we've only ever seen Kiritsugu take pot shots from a distance, so this is really his first real test eliminating or trying to eliminate an enemy up close and personally. I can't really miss Maya. I don't know, if Maya was still here, it probably would have had her hiding somewhere, stepping out at just the right moment, maybe even sacrificing her, dare I say. I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. Oh yeah, there's still this fight going on. This, this episode's going to have too much tension. That's right. Oh, so the blades are kind of infused with mana. I mean, I guess I kind of expected that. Hmm. I thought it was because he didn't have a soul, but What is that? Oh my god, it's going for like straight through the heart. He broke all those ribs, man. Didn't even try and duck. Ah, no. No, we cannot be in self blame mode when you're in a fight like that. Okay, this is like physical grail. What? There's just shave off a bit of hair. Oh. Okay, I'm not an animation expert, but this looks amazing. Got him. Okay, okay. We're a little bit more evened out. Okay, so I'm assuming he's completely not trained in close up combat. It's all been like assassiny shoot from a distance. There we go. That's cheating, man. Wait, he's just gonna club him over the head. Oh my god. Ah. Whoa. Okay, I have to say, Kirei is so cool. And terrible. Like a terrible human being. What? Oh, he can throw them like that? Oh, I love that transition. Oh. Oh, she pulled through. Hey, he reverted back to his normal self. I feel like Saber and Kiritsugu have a lot more in common than they care to admit. They're both big picture people. Wait, wait, did he already kill Kirei? And this is like, with the blood of everyone that's died for it. Ugh. It's like raining blood as well. It's like your brains are too small for me to get to you. It does have its own agenda. It's no, no. By destroying everyone. Yeah, this is where it all goes horribly wrong. He's such a child that he doesn't even know the deepest parts of him that are actually really messed up. Oh, is this gonna be like a trolley problem? Yeah. Which one do you say? Utilitarian would say the most number of people. He would just straight up murder them, all of them. Wait, is this something that actually happened to him, or this is just more showing him his mind, how it works? Shit. Kids as well, I assume. Is it making the point that he doesn't know when to stop? Like how much sacrifice is too much? He'll keep saving the world until there's literally just one person left. Ah, that's great. That's so great. Because eventually the scales tip. Oh man. Didn't we call this? We called it. The Grail's like, you don't want conflict? Let's get rid of all the people. Uh, wow. Damn, the Grail is savage. I don't know that name. Ooh, dagger. I mean, that just seems so much more personal. Oh my god. That's the same way Kirei killed her. I mean, he's killing the Grail. So he's not. Yeah, okay. It's just so. Oh god. Yeah. Uh, whoa, okay, whoa. He was able to fight his instincts to sacrifice the few for the many. Wait. He's ending it. He's like, I don't need to get you, and nor do I want to. Like, you can just dwell on your own need to understand yourself. And you can just go to hell. Basically, is what Kiritsugu said. Oh man, okay, this just keeps going. I can't even process fast enough. Okay, but the Grail was essentially using Kiritsugu's instinct to sacrifice the few for the many, to trick him into basically wiping out the world so that it could be born. I don't know. Ugh, sadist side just coming out max power. Ew. I feel like you don't want to make her mad. He's gonna regret making Saber mad. Ugh, this is so wrong. Is he gonna supercharge her? Is this when they finally work together as a team? Destroy it. Yep. Oh man. Why are you cock blocking? Oh no. Okay. I don't know why. Just instinctively, I feel like you can't ever destroy the Grail. As long as people wish for things, I don't know, I just feel like it's got its claws too deep into the human psyche to be destroyed in this way. Maybe it'll disappear for a couple of generations, but yeah, I don't know. That was wild. So many wild things happened. Okay, maybe I'll just focus on the thing that's foremost on my mind right now, which is like the whole what happened as soon as Kiritsugu actually got into the Grail and was offered his wish of I guess, solving humanity's conflict problem. But the way that the Grail played it, and you knew that it was going to be something completely contrary to what Kiritsugu himself actually wanted. As soon as he saw like the blood bubbling up from the Grail and then just raining down on that scene, and as soon as like he saw the Grail take on Arisville's body and look and demeanor, but just in that really creepy disembodied voice. Yeah, so as soon as he saw that and saw that the Grail itself this whole time has wanted to be quote unquote born into the world. And in doing so, I believe the implication was that it would have destroyed humanity. And it used Kiritsugu's own methods and philosophy to try and convince him that that was the right decision, to allow it to be born into the world, while also achieving his dream of ridding humanity of conflict by essentially ridding the world of humanity, I think was the gist. I thought it was so clever the way that the Grail opened Kiritsugu's eyes to the flaw in his sacrifice the few, save the many philosophy, with that scenario of the two boats, but repeated endlessly. Like, it was a great play on the traditional trolley problem. You know that problem, like everyone knows it, where you have to choose between saving 5 people tied to one train track by pulling this lever, but in doing so you will kill one other person that's tied to the other track. But that original formulation of the trolley problem is like it's like a once and done deal. If you have to repeat that same moral choice over and over and over, there does come a point when, as Kiritsugu realized, you've killed more people than you've actually saved in the end. Even though in each individual instance that you've had to choose, you've technically chosen the morally correct choice, at least from a utilitarian point of view. But yeah, like Kiritsugu, it just hit him that eventually the scales become unbalanced and they turn against you. And he was totally shook. And because this is what I find so brilliant about what the Grail tried to do, even though it didn't succeed. It banked on the fact that Kiritsugu would be so horrified that his entire justification for killing so many people had been completely pulled out from underneath him, that he would stop short right at that point and shy away from killing. At the end, it was Ilya and Arisville left. I mean, they weren't really Ilya and Arisville, like the real ones, but it was the Grail using their memories, I guess, as puppets to convince Kiritsugu to not destroy it and to allow the Grail to be born into the world. I don't exactly know. I guess it kind of makes me feel like there's some very deep latent evil that has been trapped inside the Grail, and it's just been waiting for someone to come along and release it out into the world, knowingly or not, so that it can just wreak havoc. You know what's crazy is that ultimately it wasn't even Kiritsugu who legitimately defeated Kirei, for the right to wish on the Grail. It was the Grail itself. I'm like 92% sure, who decided, yep, this is a moment I'm going to flood this place with blood and completely destroy the room that they're having this little tiff in. And I'm going to choose who I offer my wish to. And I'm going to choose Kiritsugu. And it just weirdly felt like the Grail had been dictating all of the events that have been happening for the last 2 seasons from a distance. It's used its power and its draw over all the other masters and servants to set it up in such a way as to have Kiritsugu here at the end. And it really didn't matter who bested who and whatever. I don't know. It's just this odd feeling that it's all been arranged, like predestined for Kiritsugu to get to this point. But I loved that moment when Kiritsugu, he saw through the Grail's ploy. It was a terrible moment because he had to force himself to kill his family, or I mean their images, in really the most personal and intimate of ways. It was a total mindfuck. But Kiritsugu managed to be like, you know what? I'm still that guy. Like, even though he had just been crushed with the revelation that maybe he's been wrong in his moral calculations this entire time, he was still mentally strong enough to see through the Grail's manipulation of that. And I loved when the Grail essentially was like, when he refused to do what it wanted him to do, it was like, you bastard. I thought that I had you. It was nuts. Also, even if Kiritsugu knew that Irisville wasn't really Irisville, etc., I don't doubt that he was feeling the pain he would have felt as if he was killing the real Irisville. He wasn't just killing the Grail. He was killing his own dream that he's had since he was a kid. Well, ever since he first killed his dad. You know, his first murder started from there. And then that just put him on this path of wanting to save the world by killing all the bad people. So he really, in killing the image of Irisville, he was also killing the child that has been within him this whole time. How to put it? No longer can he shelter himself from the moral weight of all of the people that he has killed. He can't cover that anymore with this naive belief, this childish belief that he's clung to, that it'll all be worth it in the end. The most he realized he can do now at this point was to make sure that the Grail, or whatever it is, whatever evil lies within it, doesn't get out. So once this is all over, and I don't even know if he's going to come out of this alive, he'll go back to the world and the world will still be the same shitty place it always was, except now he no longer has that pathway open to him where he has a hope of making it a better place. But at the very least, at least all the people who still inhabit this shitty world still exist. And then there was like Saber's part of the story. I haven't even talked about Kirei. Okay, Saber. So I feel like she also had a bit of a breakthrough in this episode. She also was being crushed by the sudden realization that she had inadvertently caused, or if not caused, at least contributed significantly to Lancelot's madness and his eventual turning into Berserker. That it was her emotionless, inhuman choice of giving him undeserved forgiveness and being ignorant of how that would really twist and be cruel to Lancelot that led to this point. And yet in the end, she stuck to her guns and made yet another quote unquote inhuman choice by killing him. She'd set her sights on the Grail, giving her a fresh start, and she's like, I'm sorry, but you're in the way of that at the moment. Like, eventually I'll help you by giving Britain a new chance and by going back to that time period and redoing things the way that I should have, but you're going to have to die now. And I love that Lancelot, I love that they gave him back his human form just right at the end. And he was like, you know, it's similar. It was like, you bastard, Saber. But look, I knew that that's just what you do. You make these decisions out of a very inhuman way of calculating what's best and what's the right thing to do. And you just do it by ignoring the other human parts of you. And Kirei, I mean, we can talk about Kirei more next time once I've processed more, but so he's dead, but he died in such a way that he never got what he wanted. He didn't get to a point of greater understanding of himself. I think it was very telling that that's what he wanted in the moment of his death. He wanted to understand his own self and desires, and he didn't get that. He also, I guess, didn't get to make Kiritsugu suffer as he wanted to, but I don't think that really was the ultimate desire of his own heart. So yeah, I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at the way that Kiritsugu and Kirei's fight ended, because there was a moment of absolute despair and it was a rare moment where Kirei broke and allowed his fears to really come to the surface, which I thought was really interesting. Hey, thank you guys for lasting so long throughout this series. We only have one episode left. I'm sure it's going to be a banger. So I look forward to watching episode 12 with you guys next time, and then we'll have a good yarn about, I don't know, themes, favorite characters, just the depressing stuff that this show brings up to the surface about the world, but just how brilliantly it paints like these moral quandaries, and it doesn't really ever give a straightforward answer, because as is the case, or as should be the case with these moral questions, there never really is just one right answer. So in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.